Welcome to Seniority Authority. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey, and I track down experts to answer your questions on aging. Let's get smarter about growing older. Welcome to Seniority Authority. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey. One thing we know today is that statistically, people fear Alzheimer's more than death. But what if I told you that there was a practice that could significantly reduce your chance of getting Alzheimer's with something as simple as reframing your thoughts? Seniority Authority exists to answer questions on aging. And today's guest, Tricia D'Antonio, has a lot of great answers for us. She's Vice President of Policy and Professional Affairs of the Gerontological Society of America. She's also the Project Director of Reframing Aging, which is a long-term social change initiative designed to change the way people understand and talk about aging. And I love this. Think about things like seatbelts and not smoking. These kinds of long-term social initiatives are what we're talking about here. Trish has a BS from Duchanne University and an MS and MBA from Temple University. A board-certified geriatric pharmacist, she spent her career in healthcare at the national level. Thanks to our sponsor, the Riverwoods Group, Northern New England's largest family of nonprofit retirement communities, where active adults find community, purpose, and peace of mind. Visit riverwoodsgroup.org. Now, let's hear from today's guest. Trish, welcome to Seniority Authority.
Kathleen, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here to talk with you and to talk with your audience about what a project is very near and dear to my heart, both personally and professionally.
Well, it's about time we all change the way people thought about aging. I am on board with that. So, and I know that all of our listeners are also interested in what your reframing initiative is doing, not only just to change their minds, but also for some of the positive consequences. But let's talk a little bit about you first. You bring a tremendous amount of experience to this role, and you've been in gerontology for a while. What first piqued your interest to get into this field?
Those of us working in aging, we often get that question, and many of us say it started by accident. And I have to say that my career path in aging started by accident when I was in pharmacy school and I was looking for a job as a pharmacy intern. And there was a position at a long-term care facility where I served as a pharmacy intern for what then were in-house pharmacies in nursing homes. So practice has changed a lot since then. But one thing that was key is that pharmacists had some key respect in nursing homes to be able to manage medications, medication therapies. Quite often I was recommending we remove medication from somebody's regimen. So from there, I realized that I truly had an interest and in nursing homes, recognizing that there was so much more, you obviously paid attention to the pharmacy regulations, but you had to be aware of all the regulations in a nursing home because everyone contributed to the success of the residents in the nursing home. And so I went on to look at how I was very interested in how the funding streams went. So then went to Temple for a master's in health finance and the MBA and worked for a year at the Philadelphia Geriatric Center as a resident working in administration and finance. So really understanding how the finances worked, but then how the finances were applied, like how do you keep a facility viable? And all of that kind of led to more interest in policy because I was starting to realize how that was impacting us directly and impacting our communities directly. So came down here to Washington, D.C. from Philadelphia 22 years ago now and got involved with associations and then worked for the D.C. Department of Health in the regulatory area. So then that led me to this job that I have at GSA to direct the policy initiatives that we know that will impact us all as we age, but really make sure that we're representing some good evidence-based policies and practices.
Now, tell us just a little tiny bit about the Gerontological Society of America. Is this a research-based organization or is this more public policy and advocacy?
So GSA is a professional membership association. So our members are conducting research in aging across the life course, right? So when we think about gerontology, we really look at what's the impact across your life course, impacting different things that may impact you as you age, right? Our members are also educators, work in academia, training the workforce who work in aging. And in our vision is that we all have meaningful lives as we age, right? So we have 5,400 members. We're international, so it's not only in the United States. And essentially, our role is to conduct this research and to apply that in practice, right? See that it translates into practice and policy to benefit us as we age.
And so the new initiative, Reframing Aging, is exactly a great example of what you do, because it's an initiative that brings new research and information to the public to help them understand aging differently. So what are the top two goals of Reframing Aging?
So as you talked about in your introduction, right? So our mission is to improve the public's understanding of aging and what older adults contribute to society. We believe, and based on our research in framing, that this will ultimately decrease ageism, right? I would like to see an end to ageism, right?
Amen.
And also improve policies and supports, policies and programs for older people that ultimately, when you start to look at that, it really does benefit us all. You know, a policy in place for caregiving for older people benefits the daughter or the son of that older person as well, and their children, because the daughter or son can be involved across their family. So the things like that, to see policy change happen. And that's how the executive directors of the leaders of aging organizations got together to think about this was around, we were seeing that policies just were not advancing in aging as we would expect.
Sure. And aging has changed dramatically in a generation. And I'm just going to step back for those people in the audience who are wondering, what are we talking about when we say reframing aging? We're talking about reframing the way you think, speak, and experience aging. So we're talking about reframing your mind in the way that you interact with aging or people who are older than you are. So just want to clarify that. Now let's talk about this research that I mentioned at the very top of the program that a GSA member did with people who had biomarkers for Alzheimer's, because I think that's really fascinating.
So the one thing about working for GSA, right, I find the research very fascinating. And this piece, most importantly, and in fact, this past weekend in the New York Times, this research was conducted by Dr. Becca Levy at Yale University. She was interviewed in the New York Times this weekend by Paula Spann. There's a great article if your listeners get a chance to read that, if they haven't already. Highly recommend it. So while I will not, I'm a pharmacist. I understand the research. I'm certainly not the geneticist or the neurologist who can really get in deep. But what the research found is that people who have a strong biomarker, a strong gene for developing Alzheimer's, when you have a positive perspective, a positive outlook, a positive belief on aging, about aging, you are 50% less likely to develop Alzheimer's than those people who have the biomarker or the gene for Alzheimer's and they have a negative perception of aging.
So what I love about this research is that it says, as you just stated, even those folks with a biomarker for Alzheimer's can reduce their chance of getting Alzheimer's with simply changing their mental attitude. And what better incentive to change your mental attitude towards Alzheimer's and aging is that you are going to live a healthier life. And if you'd like to learn more about this specific research project, Dr. Becca Levy of Yale University has a new book out called Breaking the Age Code. It's a new book out, and it goes into more detail about the very thing we've been talking about, which is changing your mental attitude towards aging. When you change your mental attitude towards aging, you yourself, your physical body benefits. So that's pretty incredible. And I'm a supporter of anything that doesn't include more medication. As you said, at the top of the program, as a pharmacist, there's a lot of comorbidities that we have as we age. We have a lot of different things that have to be treated by medication, and thank God we have the medication that we do. But whatever we can do from a lifestyle perspective that will increase our health, I think is definitely worth trying. So tell me what you think, Trish, what are the traps that people fall into when they think about aging, and how can our listeners avoid that?
This is a communication strategy that we've researched with our partner, the Frameworks Institute. And what we learned, so we conducted interviews across the country, representative sample of people who have had a steady diet of American culture. And when I mean that, you've been here 3 years or more, you are actively participating in American culture. So you see the commercials, you hear the chatter. This is what you're hearing regularly from potentially a very young age. Right? So some of the traps that we see people fall into, or we see ourselves fall into, and the amazing part is, even as someone who's an aging expert, we thought we were doing well with our communications. And what we learned was we really weren't. One trap is othering. So when we talk about aging, we talk about older people, we talk about older people as they and them, right? So I'm not old, I'm not aging, I'm not, and we tend to other older people, right?
They, us.
They and them versus we and us, right?
Yes.
So when you hear me talking, you've probably heard it a couple of times when I talk about all of us as we age, right? We are all aging, so we have to think about it that way. But, we constantly hear they when we talk about any age group or any group, and that causes us to start to automatically think in a way that pushes us away from understanding aging. Another trap that we run into is this crisis trap. And I was guilty of this myself. I would give presentations about aging, and I would start with all the statistics and what we knew about by 2030, people over the age of 65, blah, blah, blah. And I would talk about the silver tsunami.
Sure. We've all heard, I think, the silver tsunami bandied about.
Right. What do people hear when they hear about a tsunami, right? So think about somebody who's trying to solve some big problems or look for some big solutions. Well, I'm going to stay away from a tsunami. I'm going to run from a tsunami, right? There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, and there's nothing good that's coming out of a tsunami.
Right? So that's another area, that fatalistic crisis thinking. And even when I talk with people, when I present in front of audiences and try and help them reframe messages, we still need to talk about the statistics, that people need that information, but we don't need that first, right? We need to know that there are solutions. We need to tell a more complete story about aging. We recognize our diversity in aging. Some of us have multiple chronic conditions. Some of us are very healthy. Some of us have means. Some of us are not as well off. We're all over the age of 55 or 65. How does that play into how we think about aging? And the last thing I would talk about as far as traps, and there's others, but these are ones that I think your audience could recognize, is one of individualism. So if you only ate better and exercised, you would age better. If you only saved from when you finished high school for retirement, you would have money to retire. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be eating well. I'm not saying that we should avoid exercise. I'm not saying we don't have our own responsibility in finances. What that doesn't take into consideration, though, when we make those statements and we group older people that way, is that we don't know what surrounded someone. What are those social determinants of health? Was someone a single parent working 3 jobs to make ends meet all their lives? So saving for retirement just wasn't part of the picture. Did you grow up in a neighborhood that did not have a supermarket? So you were relying on corner stores that may or may not have carried fresh fruits and vegetables. Those types of things, what surrounds us shapes us as we age as well. So those are traps that we can fall into. It's really important that we start to teach ourselves to think differently about that. And we can. There's research that shows us if we make people aware of their biases about aging, we can change. So just like you were saying earlier.
Yeah, I think that's a very exciting concept. We have changed as a nation. We've started with seatbelts. We do more recycling. I think of the Mad Men episode on TV where this famous scene in Don Draper's having a picnic with his family, and they're sitting there in a park, and they have this whole meal, and they're ready to go, and he just takes the blanket and flaps the blanket and leaves all of the trash strewn over the lawn in the park. So we've changed our minds and our thinking about other things. We can do this with aging. And as you say, it is going to benefit all of us because every one of us is aging. There is no one that is not aging. It doesn't matter your race, your beliefs, your gender. We are all doing this one thing. So let's all unify and change how we believe about our future selves. So one thing I'd like to do is share with the audience the one thing that people need to do in order to live 7.5 years longer.
Wow. The one thing.
The one thing. Yeah, exactly. Just after your individualism conversation, I just like to, it's so fun in this podcast to be able to talk about the research and then pull out the most startling fact and use that as the reason people will listen to your answer. So this is actually a fact that came out of some research.
Well, and I think it goes back to Dr. Levy's work. She's had a compendium of research over the last 30 years around aging, and it really comes around to what you can do around your positive beliefs about aging. That's really what it says. And that's why I would highly recommend that people take a look at that article that Paula Spann did. And there's a couple other interviews that Dr. Levy's done recently to really get into and explain her research, because, while there are many things that we could think about, changing our attitudes, changing the words matter, right? Changing those words, which is what we're about, changing that communication, right? So it might be what you say, what you write, what you read. Changing that starts to change how you think about aging. And that's why we talk about that. Language really is important in this, and how we can think and act differently as we communicate. Priceless, just priceless.
So changing the way you think and speak about aging will increase your lifespan. It's just you're rewiring your brain.
And that's what she talks about in her book.
If you're getting smarter, help us reach more minds. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends to follow us on social or subscribe to our newsletter at seniorityauthority.org. Why is it particularly important now to talk about ageism?
That's a really good question. So one thing I think we need to recognize is ageism is across the life course, right? So it's not only ageism toward older people. We hear ageism toward younger people as well, right? When we make statements like, oh, those millennials think they deserve everything, right? So that's not true either, right? Those are not positive ways to talk about aging. But I think in particular with the pandemic, we heard some pretty ageist statements, and I'm not sure people even realized that they were being ageist, where policies were being set for how we were going to treat people solely on how many birthdays they've celebrated. So that did not consider what we call functional age, right? What else weighs in as you age, right? So it was really hard in the beginning of the pandemic to hear statements that policymakers were providing around, well, if anybody's over the age of 65, we're just not going to be able to treat them. That's just it. And so when you think about the diversity in research, we call it the heterogeneity as we age, right? We start to become so much more different as we age. Right? That is the impact of what surrounds us. And truly, that's a lot of the reason why I think we need to be thinking about ageist practices, right? Where people are forced to retire at a certain age, policies in place there, not recognizing that older people contributed during the pandemic, whether they were babysitting for their grandchildren, right? Because their children had to go to work. Some people came out of retirement and healthcare, continued to provide services. So we really I don't think people recognize the contributions of older people in society.
Sure, they just lumped everyone by age into a category. And I think I'm speaking for a lot of my listeners. I think the goal, my listeners don't want to be ageist. They respect and appreciate older adults. And I think Many people, and I think part of this Reframing Aging initiative, many people are unaware that they are acting or speaking in a biased manner towards older adults. Can you give us some common examples of things you've seen that people may not even realize, oh yeah, I should think differently about that?
Our implicit biases, this starts when we're very young, right? Because we're fed, again, American culture, we're fed messages about anti-aging in products, right? So,
oh, yes.
uh,
oh, yeah.
And we don't realize. So we hear and we tend toward those negative cultural models about aging because that's what we've been fed for so long. Think about when you internalize this, you might say something like, oh, I had a senior moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's, we forget things from time to time. We have too much bombarding us and that can happen to anybody across the life course. When people start to make comments about someone solely because of their age, about their understanding of technology, they can't use iPhones. Mm-hmm. Right? These assumptions that we just automatically make. One of the other ones that I think is really important is sometimes people will make this assumption about themselves, like, oh, I have a pain in my back. It must be because I'm getting older. So certainly you are the age that you are. You're 72, someone's 72 years old. Certainly they can be reporting that they have a pain in their back. That's not solely because of how many birthday candles you put on your cake, right?
Right.
Go get it checked out. That's what we need to do. But people will just assume. People who are longtime smokers will say, oh, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So they won't take that next step to improve health. Those are kind of implicit biases that we carry with us that we really need to work on because we need to recognize that we can continue to improve our health, our well-being, and be part of society, recognizing that we all contribute to society.
Absolutely. So I love to include at the end of my podcast or towards the end of my podcast, what we and our listeners can do to change things. So in order to start turning the tide today on ageism, do you have one or two things that you would suggest to our listeners that they either stop or start doing during their daily lives?
So the one thing I would say that you can start to do is look at age-positive birthday cards or stop purchasing birthday cards that make fun of age. Right?
Amen. That's my pet peeve.
So, it's a start and a stop, right?
Yeah.
And I will tell you that being part of this project, I felt like it was really important for me to, one, stop purchasing those types of birthday cards for others and perpetuating that bias around aging. But I also had to ask people to stop sending those cards to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So good. Ask people to stop sending those cards to me. And there are cards out there. We have colleagues at Changing the Narrative in Colorado who have developed birthday cards that recognize and honor us all as we age. And the messages are very positive, recognizing that you're a full contributor to society, right? So those things are really important, I think, to me. Is like purchasing anti-aging products. I certainly purchase products to keep myself healthy, but the messages around anti-aging, I pay attention to those and I speak up.
So don't buy those negative birthday cards. Ask people not to send you the same kind of birthday card. And don't deny aging. And I like that you mentioned anti-aging because there's so many books out there and speakers and people that talk about anti-aging. And I think aging is a wonderful, natural, good thing. It's our attitude toward it that needs to be changed, not aging itself.
Yeah, good point. We want to embrace aging.
Absolutely. I don't think it makes sense to say 70 is the new 50. 70 is 70, and thank God we're here for it. Our grandparents and our prior generations weren't. And for the most part, we are healthier at age 70 than any other time in the history of our country. I was reading something the other day that said in the 1900s, there was little chance of a son knowing his mother at age 20. And today, a son would know not only his mother, but also his grandmother at age 20. So it's a positive thing.
Yes, that's a great point. That's a really great point.
If we've whipped people into a frenzy as a result of this podcast, and which I hope we do, and they want to do more, how can they get involved in the Reframing Aging initiative that you're launching across the country?
Great question. We have a website, www.reframingaging.org. There are resources and tools there, including a quick start guide. So I mentioned earlier about how to stop using the cues of like tsunami. Well, we have in the quick start guide, instead of using the term tsunami, try to talk about as Americans live longer and healthier lives. So there's some prompts around the traps that we talked about earlier. We also are inviting people to join. We talk about the caravan. Right. So we named our newsletter, The Caravan. It's an electronic newsletter, comes every other month in your mailbox. Sign up for that. It's free. We highlight different projects around the country. We highlight different tools and resources that you can use. And we also share some other research that we know that's tangential to the work that we're doing to reframe aging, frame our communication strategies. And then the last thing that I would say is we recently released a series of videos called Frame of Mind. There are 2 videos now. I believe next week you might see a third video.
Great.
So they're short. 2 minutes long to really understand what does it mean to frame aging. Take a look at those and start to think about that and think about where how you can start to apply these practices in your personal and professional lives.
I think that's terrific. The videos are also on reframingaging.org.
Yes.
And I'm just going to add a suggestion that this is not a one and done, and this is not just you. So if you're also part of a book group or a tennis group or a walking gang in your neighborhood, tell them about it. Start a meeting with saying what you've learned here or what you learned when you checked out Reframing Aging. Spread the word, because this is how social change happens, is not only one person, but multiple people taking this on and saying, this is something I'm going to start changing. So it's the only way that this will really happen. And we need this change to happen because we are all getting older and we want to be respected for our contributions and where we are in our life. I just want to say thank you, Trish. It's been fabulous to have this conversation with you. And I am thrilled at the work that you're doing. I couldn't be happier that someone is focusing on this.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been great to meet with you and talk with you as we prepared for this. And as we continue to build this, we know it's going to take time, right? It's a generation's work to change culture. It doesn't happen overnight, but this is how we do it. This is how we all participate in the movement. So it's been a real pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. That's our show for today. Did it spark a question? If so, send it to us at seniorityauthority.org and we'll track down the answer. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and also rate us on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, let's get smarter about growing older.